There is a moment in Season 7 of Regular Show, Episode 28, called Maillard's Package, where Mordecai and Rigby are sitting on the roof of Mr. Maillard's enormous mansion in stolen suits of armor, drinking stolen sodas, doing absolutely nothing they were sent there to do. The afternoon light is soft the way it always is in this show. That particular hand-painted quality, the kind of warmth that exists specifically in memories of afternoons you were supposed to be productive and weren't. And Mordecai goes quiet in a way he rarely does. He looks out at the skyline, and then he says, almost to himself, like he's saying it for the first time, even though you suspect it's been waiting in him for a while. I mean, we've had this job for I don't even know how long. I just wonder, is this it? Is this the best we can do? And then Rigby says, it's almost 2 o'clock, and they should probably go wait by the door. And the moment passes. That's the thing about Mordecai. The moment always passes. He has more of those quiet reckonings than maybe any character in the whole show, these little pauses where he almost touches the real shape of his life, where the question almost gets asked out loud, where the thing underneath the thing almost surfaces, and then something happens. A delivery truck shows up. Rigby needs to use the bathroom. Benson calls. Something cosmic arrives. The thought dissolves back into the afternoon like it was never there, and tomorrow Mordecai wakes up and starts the whole loop again. He is the king of the almost, the patron saint of one more day, the guy who knows, on some level, that he's running out of tomorrows to defer to, and still finds a way to defer. What this video is about is exactly that. Not in a cruel way, not as a trial of the character, but as a genuine, sustained investigation into what Regular Show was actually doing when it built Mordecai the way it did. Because the more time you spend with him not just laughing at the comedic moments, but sitting with the quieter stuff underneath, the architecture of how he fails, and why the more you understand that he isn't just a funny slacker with relationship troubles. He's the show's deepest and most careful argument about a very specific kind of young adult paralysis. The kind that doesn't look like paralysis from the outside because the person seems functional, even responsible, even kind. The kind where the problem isn't inability. The problem is the refusal to apply the ability where it matters most. So, let's go into it slowly. Let's take our time. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you are right now and what time it is. I genuinely want to know. I want to know if you're watching this at 2 in the morning in a dark bedroom, or at noon on a Tuesday from a couch, or on your phone, somewhere more interesting than either of those. Tell me the city if you want. I'm curious about who these videos find and when. Mordecai was 23 years old when Regular Show premiered on the 6th of September, 2010. He was still 23 when the show ended on the 16th of January, 2017. That's nearly 7 years of our real time in which he did not age, did not officially progress, did not move the dial on the fundamental shape of his life in any lasting way. He worked the same job. He slept in the same house. He played games on the same couch with the same best friend. The universe tried to end approximately twice a week, and he helped stop it every time. And then Monday came around, and he was back at the morning meeting, getting assigned to clean the gutters. That frozen quality is not an accident. The show is not simply failing to track time. It is depicting something true about a particular phase of young adult life, the phase where the days feel urgent in the moment and identical in retrospect, where you are busy in the sense of having things to do, but not busy in the sense of building toward anything, where you are 23 in September, and then somehow you are still 23 in January, and the years are passing without the distinct sensation of going anywhere, Regular Show knew its audience. It was made for people in that exact fog, by people who remembered it. Here is the foundational fact that makes everything else in this video make sense. J.G. Quintel, the creator of Regular Show, voices Mordecai using his own natural speaking voice. Not a performance, not a character, just himself talking, his real register, the way he actually sounds when he's not performing. He mentioned in a Den of Geek interview in 2015 that Mordecai was pretty much his alter ego, and that at the time of creating the show, he was definitely kind of what I was like in college. He also said, and I love this detail, that he is a calm person in real life, that he doesn't yell, and that he had to actually practice yelling because Mordecai yells in a lot of episodes, and that wasn't natural for him. On his own Twitter bio, simply and perfectly, he described his voice acting role as the voice of Mordecai, which is just my regular voice. So this is a creator building a character who is a version of himself at a younger, less sordid stage of life, voicing that character in his actual voice, spending 7 seasons slowly working that character toward the person the creator became. That's not just a fun production detail. That is the entire emotional framework of what the show is doing with Mordecai. He is not a caricature of a slacker as an abstract type. He is a specific, internally consistent self-portrait, drawn with genuine love and genuine honesty, given the long, slow arc toward becoming someone different. When Mordecai fails, when he can't ask Margaret out for 3 seasons, when he torpedoes his relationship with CJ at Muscleman's wedding, when he sits on the mansion roof and asks whether this is the best he can do, and then lets the question dissolve into an afternoon, the person who wrote that failure and speaks it in that voice is working through something he understands from the inside, not as a recovered wound that he has moved past, but as a texture of experience that left a real impression. That makes everything the show does with him feel different. The failures aren't punchlines at a character's expense. They're examinations of a real pattern, rendered with the specific precision of someone who lived in that pattern for long enough to map its contours exactly. Let me start at the surface of who Mordecai is, because there's something genuinely easy to miss right there. Mordecai is not the irresponsible one. The show goes to real lengths in its early seasons to make this clear, and you can lose sight of it if you're not paying attention, because the premise positions him and Rigby as essentially equivalent slackers who cause equivalent mayhem, but they aren't equivalent. Almost every disaster, almost every catastrophic escalation, almost every time Benson ends up screaming about how they're going to lose their jobs, almost all of it traces back to Rigby. Rigby forges the rejection letter. Rigby eats the pretzel wrong and ruins the portrait. Rigby makes the dare that starts the game, that opens the portal, that nearly ends everything. Mordecai, in most of these situations, is the one saying, "Dude, maybe we shouldn't," before eventually going along with it anyway, because he genuinely likes Rigby, and they've been doing this since kindergarten. Mordecai is measurably, demonstrably, on every available metric, the more responsible of the two. He fills out Rigby's job applications because Rigby finds paperwork boring. He mediates between Rigby and whoever Rigby has offended. He cleans up more of the messes, remembers more of the things they were supposed to do, keeps the surface of their shared life functional enough that neither of them gets fired. And this is precisely where the trap closes around him. When your best friend is a live grenade in raccoon form, being the responsible one is an incredibly low bar to clear, and you can spend your entire 20s clearing it and feeling approximately fine about yourself without ever once confronting the fact that clearing a low bar is not the same as moving forward. Mordecai doesn't slack off in the obvious way that's easy to name and address. He doesn't show up drunk or blow things up on purpose or declare publicly that he doesn't care about anything. He slacks off in the quiet, acceptable, almost invisible way, the way that reads as easygoing, as laid back, as having a good balanced personality that doesn't take things too seriously. He procrastinates. He drifts. He invests genuine creative and emotional energy into things that don't require commitment. Video games in the afternoon, hypothetical futures where he imagines himself as the CEO of an airline, elaborate fantasies about the life he might have, coffee shop visits that are really just excuses to be near a person he's not brave enough to talk to directly. The show coined a word for his specific version of avoidance. When Mordecai is around a woman he likes, and he completely freezes, goes slightly higher pitched, doesn't know what to do with his hands, builds towards saying something and reroutes at the last second into something meaningless, manufactures a reason why. The exact current moment is not quite right. His friends call it pulling a Mordecai. They have a segment where they do impressions. Rigby does the gesture, the half reach that doesn't arrive anywhere, and the crew all nod in recognition because they have watched this happen enough times that they have a shared vocabulary for it. That bit is played for laughs, and it is funny, but it is the kind of funny that requires the writers to understand the thing they're depicting with real precision. This isn't just a gag about a guy who can't talk to a girl. This is a portrait of a specific emotional posture, the one where you want something very badly, but construct a constant supply of reasons why the conditions aren't quite right, and each reason sounds sensible in isolation, and the sum of them is years of your life gone, while the thing you wanted sat, waiting for the moment to be perfect, which it never was and never will be, because that's not how moments work. The show is affectionate toward this posture. It finds it funny and also a little heartbreaking simultaneously. The way you find your younger self funny and heartbreaking when you look back at something you did for years that you can now see clearly. That double register comedy and genuine feeling occupying the same space is one of the things regular show does better than most of its contemporaries. The failure is funny. The failure is also genuinely costly. The failure is also deeply, recognizably human. The show keeps all three of those things alive at once. To understand why Mordecai is the way he is, you have to go back before the park. He went to art school. Not casually, not as a half-hearted attempt, he got accepted into college university and actually attended. He was studying art in a formal context, pursuing the thing that would later turn out to be his life's work, back when it was still just a dream shaped like a major. And at some point during his time there, he was asked to paint a portrait. Someone sat for him a woman, according to the flashback in Bad Portrait, and he applied himself to it. And when it was done, it was so bad that she ran away crying, not just left the room, ran away, in tears. He was also struggling in sculpture. His friend, the person fans have come to call Sad Sax Guy, based on the recurring visual gag of him playing a saxophone while looking deeply gloomy, apparently advised him to create a sculpture of his instructor's human form, which was also a disaster. The exact combination of failures is not spelled out in full detail, but whatever it was enough. He dropped out. He got the park job. He brought the talent with him and quietly left the identity behind. Bad Portrait, Season 5, Episode 24, is the episode that revisits this most carefully, and it is an 11-minute study in a specific kind of creative fear that is more honest and more precise than most dedicated art about artists manages to be. The setup is simple. A professional portrait of Benson gets damaged. Mordecai is the person with the art school background, and he ends up with both the responsibility and the excuse to avoid it. The episode takes its time, showing you the specific texture of his resistance, the wandering around the house instead of sitting down, the small invented reasons to do anything other than the thing, the way the canvas seems to get more blank the longer he looks at it. He goes to a place in his head where the task feels impossible not because it is, but because the stakes attached to it, the way his own identity and the old wound are both tied to it, have made it feel that large. The resolution is the episode's real argument. He shows up. He goes to the induction ceremony with the portrait. He lets Benson see it. The portrait is actually good. Benson loves it, hangs it in his office. But the show earns that outcome by making you feel the entire length of the resistance that preceded it, because the resistance is the actual subject. The AV Club review of the episode put the central truth cleanly. Being an artist isn't really a function of talent or even effort. Rather, it's a willingness to take seriously the very notion of being an artist. Mordecai has the talent. What he doesn't have, what he spends the entire episode building toward, is the willingness to act like someone whose work is worth looking at. That dropped out of art school detail is load-bearing in the whole architecture of who Mordecai is. It establishes that long before the park, long before Benson and Rigby and the morning meetings and Margaret and all of it, Mordecai had already encoded this pattern. He tried something that mattered to him. It didn't go well. Instead of sitting with that, learning from it, getting better through it, which is the only way artistic growth works, which requires absorbing failure and continuing anyway, he withdrew from the context entirely. He stepped away from the scale where failure could measure him. There is something very specific about the kind of wound an early creative failure leaves if you don't process it correctly. It doesn't just make you doubt a skill. It makes you doubt the whole self-concept, the part of you that said, I am the kind of person who makes art. If that self-concept was wrong once, it might be wrong again. And the safest thing, the thing that protects you from ever feeling that specific collapse again, is to stop building yourself around it. To quietly let the identity go while keeping the ability around as a private thing. Something you do occasionally when no one is watching. Something that can't be measured because you're not putting it in front of anyone. Mordecai can paint. He just stopped calling himself a painter. And the gap between those two things is exactly the gap his whole arc is about closing. There are two kinds of people in the world of regular show, and the distinction is not between good and bad, or competent and incompetent, or brave and cowardly. The distinction is between people who know what they want and move toward it, however badly, and people who know what they want and can't make themselves move. Almost everyone in the main cast falls into the first category, which is part of what makes Mordecai so particular. Rigby is chaotic and selfish and makes terrible decisions, but he is fundamentally a person who goes toward what he wants. He wants to win the video game. He throws himself at it. He wants Eileen. He pursues her badly and awkwardly and sometimes disastrously, but he pursues her. He wants to not feel inferior to his brother Don. He processes that feeling in loud and often counterproductive ways, but he processes it. He wants to graduate. He sits in a classroom with teenagers for an entire story arc, and it is humiliating and uncomfortable, and he keeps going. Rigby's growth is explosive and messy, and sometimes it leaves scorch marks, but it is genuine movement. Benson wants to run a good park and have his work recognized and build something in his life beyond the job that defines him. He pursues all of these things with the furious intensity of someone who has decided what he's for, even when the universe keeps making it harder. Muscle Man wants to be worthy of his father's legacy and worthy of Starla, and he pursues both with everything he has, loudly and emotionally, and sometimes embarrassingly, but without hesitation.
Even Pops, sweet, confused, beautiful Pops living in his own gentle fog, knows on some level that he is made for something large, and when the time comes, he does not flinch from it.
He walks toward the thing that was always going to claim him. Mordecai wants to be an artist. He wants to be loved. He wants to do something with his life that means something. He wants all of this with what feels like genuine depth. You can feel it in the moments when the real feeling comes through, when the daydreams slip out, or the quiet question on the roof breaks the surface. And, for the majority of the show's run, not a season or two of setup, but 7 seasons, more than 200 episodes, years of real time for the people watching. He does essentially nothing about any of it. What makes him something richer than a cautionary tale? What the show has to do carefully, and mostly does, is that his failure to act is not stupidity and is not indifference. It is a very particular and very recognizable flavor of perfectionism that has calcified, over time, into paralysis. He believes somewhere, underneath everything, that if the conditions aren't exactly right, the thing won't work. He'll ask Margaret out when the perfect moment comes. He'll go back to art when he's rebuilt enough confidence. He'll be fully honest with CJ when he's completely certain what he feels. He's waiting for the internal signal that it's time, the one that will arrive and make the choice feel safe. And what he doesn't understand for most of the show's run is that the signal is generated by the modal movement, not the other way around. You don't feel ready and then go. You go and then, gradually, you feel ready in retrospect. The AV Club review of I Like You High articulated the diagnosis as cleanly as anything. Mordecai wasted so much time not being with Margaret, not just because he was a coward, but because he was a perfectionist. Indeed, the former state of mind helped create the latter. That's the whole of it. He doesn't avoid things because he doesn't care. He avoids them because he cares so much that the measurement feels unbearable, and the only move that feels safe is to never fully start. Let's talk about Margaret, because she is where most of this becomes visible, and where the show is most honest about what Mordecai costs the people around him when he can't get clear. Margaret Smith is a robin, red-feathered, who works at the coffee shop near the park. She's sharp and warm and funny and ambitious, and from essentially the moment she appears, Mordecai is gone for her. The show doesn't play this coyly. He reroutes his whole life around opportunities to be near her. He invents errands. He orchestrates group outings. He finds reasons to go to the coffee shop so often that it becomes a running joke among the crew, everyone understanding perfectly well that there is exactly one reason for all these coffee runs, and it is not the coffee. He doesn't say anything. Across Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, he is near her constantly and direct with her never. He builds up to conversations and diverts. He almost says things and doesn't. He watches her go on dates with other people and feels the specific misery of that and still doesn't speak. The show is patient with this in the early seasons, in the way a show can afford to be patient when it has 8 seasons in front of it. But as the arc accumulates length, as the years pass, the patience starts to acquire a different quality. It stops reading as romantic buildup and starts reading as a document of time. You realize that the slow burn tension you were enjoying has been running long enough that it is no longer tension, it is avoidance. And avoidance has consequences that tension does not. Stake Me Amadeus is the Season 4 finale, and it is the episode everyone who watched the show at the time remembers, the one that hit harder and more honestly than the premise. A guy asks a girl out in a restaurant while robot criminals try to kill them. I would suggest it should. Mordecai has spent 4 seasons circling Margaret, and he has finally, genuinely, made a decision. He saves up special currency. He gets a reservation at the most expensive restaurant in the city. He is going to ask her to be his girlfriend. Tonight. Out loud. In actual words, she has been accepted to journalism school. She is going to college. She is leaving. She tells him this, the way people tell difficult things to someone they care about and have been afraid of telling gently, apologetically, with real pain on her own face, and she runs out of the restaurant crying because she can't stay in the room for the aftermath. And Mordecai drops to his knees in the middle of an ongoing shootout with animatronic criminals from 3 seasons ago, and the show holds on him kneeling on the restaurant floor while chaos moves around him, and it is one of the most emotionally coherent images in the whole run. The universe is literally exploding around him, and the only thing that matters is the person who just walked out that door. The AV Club review of that episode wrote something that has stayed with me since the first time I read it. The point isn't that Margaret should have made this decision differently. Rather, this is all a grim reminder of just how many times Mordecai and Margaret could have been together so much earlier if either of them had had the courage to do so. They wasted so much time on the assumption that there would be better opportunities later, when, in fact, time was always running out. That is the thing. He waited for the perfect moment. The perfect moment existed. It existed across 4 seasons of opportunity, and then it closed. Not dramatically, not because someone was cruel, but because life kept moving while he stood still. And when you stand still long enough, the moment you were waiting for becomes the moment you missed. Margaret got into journalism school because she was doing the work of becoming someone. Mordecai was waiting to feel ready. These two processes do not have the same pace, and the show does not pretend otherwise. The last scene of Stake Me Amadeus is Mordecai and Rigby on the park roof at night. Rigby asks if Mordecai wants to talk about Margaret. Mordecai says not yet. They sit there. The city moves below them. Nothing resolves. That's the right ending for that episode. Some losses don't resolve quickly. Some of them just have to be sat with until the sky lightens. The show doesn't let Mordecai off the hook for this, which is part of what makes it good. It would have been very easy to frame Margaret's departure as pure tragedy delivered by an uncaring universe, his dreams stolen by circumstance. The poor guy, what bad luck. The show instead is honest that the loss is at least partially authored by his own habits. She left because she had a life that was moving forward. He watched her have that life for 4 years and never said what he meant while she was there to hear it. And then he does it again. Enter CJ, a cloud being literally made of water vapor, able to change shape, capable of generating actual rain and storms when her emotions run high enough, which is both very funny and very telling. Mordecai meets her while online dating during his recovery from the Margaret loss, and the chemistry is immediate and different from what he had with Margaret. Where Margaret was a slow-building warmth, a person he was always almost saying something to, CJ is present and electric and arrives fully formed into his life. Their energy together is funnier, more volatile, more alive in the current moment, and still, he pulls a Mordecai. I Like You High Season 5 is built around Mordecai receiving a text from CJ that seems to confess feelings, accidentally sending back a garbled response that reads as a mutual confession, and then spiraling so completely about what it means and what to do, and whether he's ready. And what about Margaret? And what if it goes wrong, that he ends up in a cosmic abyss, facing the sentient custodians of text messaging etiquette, who may or may not erase him for violating their rules. The phone guardians. They appear and essentially tell him the same thing everyone in his life has been trying to tell him. Just say it. Just say the actual thing you feel. Just send the text. He almost doesn't. He is standing on the literal edge of a void that will consume him for eternity, and it is still harder for him to say, "Yes, I like you," than to deal with the void. That is not an accident. That is the show being precise about the weight he has assigned to the act of being honest about his feelings, a weight that has become, through years of avoidance, genuinely enormous. The relationship that follows Mordecai and CJ in seasons 5 and 6 is the show's second sustained attempt to show you what Mordecai looks like when he's actually in something, rather than hovering at the edges. And what it reveals is both good and limiting. He is capable of warmth. He is capable of genuine care, real humor, real presence in the pleasant moments. What he cannot consistently manage is the hard version of presence, the kind where you're honest, even when the honesty is complicated, where you say the thing that might damage the comfortable mood, where you acknowledge what you actually feel, even when what you actually feel is inconvenient. With CJ, the specific failure is a failure of clarity. He still has residual feelings for Margaret in the way anyone has residual feelings for someone who meant a great deal to them. This is normal. The handling of it is not. Instead of telling CJ honestly that he has moved on from Margaret, but not entirely, that occasionally a thought surfaces and he processes it, and it doesn't mean what it might look like. Instead of trusting CJ with the actual complexity of his interior, he presents her with a simplified version that keeps things comfortable. He manages the comfortable surface instead of having the complicated conversation. And the complicated conversation accumulates underneath, and eventually it explodes. Dumped at the altar is the worst Mordecai gets in the entire show, and I want to spend real time with it because I think it matters that the show made this choice and did not look away from it. Muscle Man's wedding day. The day Mitch Sorenstein marries Starla. The day that, by any reasonable measure, should be entirely about Muscle Man and Starla and the commitment they're making to each other, the family coming together, the future beginning. Mordecai stands up and gives a speech about soulmates, that is, in substance, him publicly working through whether he should break up with CJ. He's not being deliberately cruel. He's not trying to ruin the wedding. He is being exactly what he has always been, so tangled in his own unresolved interior that it becomes other people's problem without him fully registering that it's happening. He talks about soulmates in a way that makes it unclear whether he thinks CJ is his. He doesn't point in her direction. Everyone in the room understands what they're watching, including CJ, who gives him back the charm bracelet he gave her as a gift and runs out crying. Muscle Man calls him out. Starla calls him out. Rigby, riding away with Mordecai afterward, asks whether go with your gut, somehow translated in Mordecai's head to completely lose your mind and try to dump your girlfriend at a wedding. The writers themselves, in a Reddit AMA several years later, described Mordecai as having been too wishy-washy with Margaret and CJ. They used that exact phrase. They were not defending the choice. What makes that moment the low point of the arc, rather than just one more in a long series of failures, is the degree to which it stopped being private. His inability to choose does not stay inside him anymore. It has expanded outward and engulfed an entire wedding. CJ, who loved him genuinely and got the worst version of his avoidance, pays the price. Muscle Man and Starla, who only wanted one good day for themselves, have that day turned into background noise for someone else's relationship drama. Mordecai's paralysis is not just costing him things at this point, it is costing the people around him, and the show does not redeem it. He doesn't have a breakthrough right after. He doesn't have an epiphany at the reception. He goes home and he stops dating for a while, at Rigby's urging, and CJ is eventually gone. And the show moves toward the space arc, with Mordecai in a quieter and more honestly directionless place than he's been in maybe the whole run. The parallel arc in Season 7, Rigby going back to high school and graduating, is the crucial mirror for everything Mordecai is avoiding, and the show uses it with considerable precision. Rigby's return to high school is played with real honesty about how humiliating it is. He is a grown raccoon sitting in a classroom with teenagers. He struggles through the material. He has to deal with the weirdness of being older than everyone else, and more obviously behind on things that other people finished years ago. The show does not soften this. It lets the difficulty be real, and Rigby does it anyway. Initially for Eileen, because he wants to be the kind of person she deserves, wants to not be the weaker half of a relationship with someone who has a college degree while he lacks a high school diploma. Then, as the arc continues, increasingly for himself, because he understands, somewhere in the process of doing the work, that finishing the unfinished thing is its own reward, that the relief of finally doing the thing is different from any other kind of relief. Rigby's graduation day special is where all of this comes to its formal culmination, and it is also one of the most honest episodes about Mordecai's position. He is snippy and apathetic through most of the preparations. The episode identifies explicitly what's happening. He's jealous that Rigby is moving up in the world, while he feels his own life is stagnant. And then Rigby accidentally says something that highlights exactly how stuck Mordecai is, and you see it land on Mordecai's face, not hurt feelings, not anger, but the specific, flat look of someone who has just heard, confirmed the thing they already knew, and had been working hard not to look at directly. The most comfortable story Mordecai has been able to tell himself for years is that he's the responsible one, the put-together one, the one who has things more under control than Rigby. That story requires Rigby to stay as the cautionary tale. When Rigby graduates, when Rigby has Eileen and is building a life and is becoming something genuinely better than who he started out as, the story collapses. The measuring stick is gone, and what Mordecai is left with is just himself, measured against himself, and the measurement is not good. Maillard's package lives in this season, and the daydream at its opening is one of the most quietly devastating images in the whole run. Mordecai is imagining himself as the founder and CEO of Mordecai International Airlines. Passengers are chanting his name. A flight attendant is thanking him over the intercom for being so responsible and dedicated. The crew needs his approval on logo designs. He approves them, mentioning he painted them himself. He has everything. He is responsible and creative and recognized. He is exactly who he always said he wanted to be. The fantasy is not glamorous. That's what makes it so painful. He is not imagining himself as a rock star or a celebrity or someone living an extraordinary life. He is imagining himself as someone who shows up reliably to something he's good at and is recognized for it. He is imagining a normal professional life organized around his actual skills. That is not an impossible fantasy. It is not even an ambitious one. It is a completely attainable thing for a person with his abilities. The fact that it lives entirely in daydream is the indictment. Benson calls his name. He snaps back. The morning meeting resumes. Gutters need cleaning. The roof conversation with Rigby later in the episode, sitting in stolen suits of armor with stolen sodas, is where the daydream and the question finally arrive at the same moment. Is this it? Is this the best we can do? That is the whole arc. right there, said out loud. That is 7 seasons of the show building toward a character who finally, sitting on a rooftop in a suit of armor that isn't his, asks the question he's been avoiding since before the show started. And then Rigby says it's almost 2 o'clock, and they go downstairs. The friendship between Mordecai and Rigby is the show's spine, and it is more complicated than it first appears, and I want to spend some time with the complication. They have been best friends since kindergarten, since before either of them had any idea what kind of person they were going to become. The friendship has the particular texture of relationships formed before self-consciousness arrived, complete comfort, shared history so long that you don't need to explain yourself, a sense that the other person knows you in a way that bypasses all the performance you've learned to put on for everyone else. That is genuinely one of the most valuable things in the world to have. It is also, when it calcifies around patterns that aren't serving either person, one of the harder things to move beyond. Not because the love is wrong, but because the dynamic has become a kind of infrastructure, and moving beyond it means redesigning something you didn't even notice was load-bearing. The shadow side of Mordecai and Rigby's friendship is not discussed explicitly in the show, but it is built into the structure of how they interact across all 8 seasons. Mordecai needs Rigby to be the irresponsible one. Not consciously, not as a deliberate calculation, but in the way that the emotional math of the whole thing depends on the roles staying fixed. As long as Rigby is the chaos engine, Mordecai is by definition the steady one. And the steadiness is not just a personality trait, it is his whole identity. The thing that feels most true about him, the answer to the question of who he is. He is the responsible one. When Rigby starts improving, when the dynamic shifts, the math stops working. And what Mordecai is left with, once the comparison that was defining him is gone, is the question of who he actually is without it. Regular Show. The movie released November 2015, set canonically around the events of Season 7, makes this structural dependency explicit in the most dramatic way possible. The film reveals that Rigby forged Mordecai's rejection letter from college university. Mordecai had been accepted. He was supposed to go. He was supposed to get out of the park and go toward the thing he wanted. And Rigby, afraid of losing his best friend, afraid of what Mordecai becoming someone different would mean for what they had faked a rejection so that Mordecai would stay. When this comes out, Mordecai is furious in a way that is entirely warranted. He disowns Rigby. He walks away. For a moment in an alternate timeline, you see what he became without Rigby, a corporate success, a professional villain in the satirical mode the movie employs, someone who has the 6-figure salary and the condo in Maui. The movie plays this version of Mordecai as a joke: evil job, evil salary, evil condo on the beach. But the point is not subtle. The version of Mordecai who got what he thought he wanted, who escaped the park and the groundskeeper job, is not a better person. He is hollow in the specific way of someone who replaced warmth with achievement without noticing the swap. The canonical Mordecai, the one who forgives Rigby, who chooses the friendship, who processes the betrayal, and comes out the other side. Still, the person who grew up next to this raccoon and loves him for, it is the one the show has faith in. Not because the betrayal wasn't real, it was, but because the friendship is also real, and because the process of forgiving Rigby is itself part of Mordecai learning how to choose. How to say, this is what matters to me, even though it's complicated, even though it cost me something, even though the situation isn't perfect. What the movie is really doing is forcing both of them to see the thing they've been implicitly agreeing not to name. Their friendship has been mutually enabling in ways that weren't entirely healthy. Rigby's recklessness gave Mordecai someone to manage, so he never had to manage himself. Mordecai's steadiness gave Rigby someone to lean on, so he never had to learn to stand on his own. They love each other genuinely, and the love is worth having. And some of the patterns inside, the love needed to change. Here is the question I want to try to get to the bottom of, because I think it's the one that explains the most. What was Mordecai actually afraid of? Not the surface fears, not the girls, or the art school, or the park job, or the comfortable drift. What was the thing underneath all of it? The root system under all the visible avoidance. My reading, and I want to be clear, this is interpretation, not something the show delivers explicitly, is that Mordecai was afraid of measurement, of finding out, in definitive terms, what he was worth. Here is what's striking about the pattern when you look at it closely. He is not afraid of difficult things in general. He fights cosmic monsters. He devises strategies under genuine life or death pressure. He goes toe-to-toe with interdimensional warlords, sentient video game scores that want to eat the universe, Death himself on a motorcycle who shows up to take people away and sometimes gets talked into a bet. In situations with objective external stakes, Mordecai is capable, often impressively so. He does not freeze in those moments. He acts. What he systematically, consistently, reliably avoids is situations that measure him personally, situations that will produce information about his worth as a romantic partner, as a creative person, as someone whose work deserves to be seen. The portrait at art school did not just hurt him in the way failure hurts. It measured him. It produced data about the gap between his aspirations and his current abilities, and that data was unbearable enough that instead of sitting with it and improving through it, he withdrew from the whole context. If you leave art school, you don't have to get another bad reaction to a portrait. If you never ask Margaret out, you can't find out that she might say no, or that she might say yes and then leave, or that anything real might happen at all that is less perfect than the version of the future you've been carrying around as a comfortable, private fantasy. He lives in the deferral because the deferral keeps the measurement from arriving. While the dream is deferred, it remains intact. He can be the guy who could have been a great artist, who could have been with Margaret, who could have done something real with his life, and the could have preserves a dignity that the actual attempt might not. At least this way, the failure is hypothetical. At least this way, the best version of him remains possible. This is a recognizable psychological pattern. It appears in the literature under terms like self-handicapping, the tendency to create conditions that allow you to explain away failure before it occurs, or to avoid the attempt entirely so that the possibility of the thing remains open. It is not a rare pathology. It is extremely common, especially in people who are smart enough to see the gap between who they are and who they could be, sensitive enough to care about that gap, but not yet practiced enough at the particular skill of accepting imperfection as the price of movement. What the show has to do to break this pattern is remove the conditions that allow the deferral to continue. Strip them away one by one. Margaret leaving is the first condition removed. CJ ending is the second. Rigby graduating is the third. Pop's dying is something else. Again, not a condition removed, but a weight added, the specific weight of a gift you didn't ask for and have to decide how to use. The space arc in seasons 7 and 8 is where the show finally changes the terrain in a fundamental way. The park gets taken off the ground and launched into space, which sounds like a comedy premise and is also, structurally, the most important thing the show could do for Mordecai's story, because the park is the location of his avoidance. The park is the physical container of the drift, the morning meetings, the house, the couch, the cart that runs out of gas, the specific quality of those afternoons that feel like they stretch forever in both directions. The park is where it is safe to not decide anything, because nothing requires a decision that can't be deferred until tomorrow, and tomorrow is always the same as today. Launch the park into space, and all of that evaporates. There is no tomorrow interchangeable with today. There is no coffee shop down the road. There is no ordinary backdrop against which to pretend the life is in a comfortable holding pattern. Every day in space is different. Every day has stakes that cannot be postponed. He has to show up fully to each one, and in space, dealing with the actual cosmic war that the show has been building toward, Mordecai is competent. He comes up with the plan to set traps for anti-pops. He contributes to the strategy. He is useful in ways that matter. The show's argument is not subtle. He has never been incapable. The capability has always been there. What has been missing is the application of that capability to the things that matter personally, to the art, to the love, to the choices about his own life. He can plan around an intergalactic, cosmic being, but he cannot plan around his own feelings. In space, with everything else stripped away, the distinction becomes impossible to maintain. And then Pops dies. Everything else can wait. The death of Pops is handled with the kind of restraint that is the show's signature for its most important emotional moments. No speech, no explanation of what it means, just the image and the feeling, and the time to sit with both. Pops flies into a star with anti-Pops, embracing the part of himself he refused for centuries, and the show does not cut away or soften it. It happened. He's gone. The universe continues. At the memorial, Mordecai stands with the rest of the crew and grieves. And then, afterward, he and Rigby quit their jobs. They leave the park. For the first time in the entire run of the show, they walk away from the place that has contained them. What the show does next is the skip. Years pass in a montage. The park is back on Earth. New young groundskeepers are there. People who look vaguely like younger versions of the crew. The show's most gentle possible suggestion that the park keeps finding people in exactly that state of betweenness. Keeps giving them the same kind of soft, unhurried time to work out who they are. Keeps being the place where the extraordinary interrupts the ordinary long enough to teach you something about yourself before the credits roll. Benson has his cats and his manager's office and eventually his marriage. Rigby has his daughters and Eileen and a life he built from scratch from the most unpromising starting materials anyone could have imagined in season 1. High Five, Ghost, and Celia are DJs in Prague. Muscle Man's children take their shirts off and yell, and Mordecai is at a gallery, not dabbling in art, not doing it on weekends as a hobby. He has a studio. He has exhibitions. He is a working, recognized, professional artist, and he is at a gallery signing autographs when he looks up and sees a Batwoman across the table who is also signing autographs because she is also showing her work, and they meet the way people meet in the context where they were always supposed to meet, both of them in the place they should have been, doing the thing they should have been doing, finally present enough in their own lives that the meeting was possible. Her name, the writers confirmed in a Reddit AMA after the finale, is Steph, named after a character from The Goonies, because J.G. Quintel loves that movie. Matt Price confirmed they never really developed a name for her during production. Owen Dennis said he appreciated the show's approach to relationships, that he was never a fan of stories where characters end up with their first love, because that's not how it usually works, and he thought there was real value in modeling something more honest about how love actually develops over time. The choice of Steph, a fellow artist, someone Mordecai met while showing his art, someone whose existence in the story depends entirely on him, having finally become the person who shows up at galleries and puts his work in front of strangers, is the show's statement about what growth actually requires. She is not a reward for eventually getting his act together. She is the demonstration that getting his act together worked. She is only possible in the life he built after he left the park, after he let himself be the person who calls himself a painter, after he did the work. Some fans were unhappy with this. A vocal segment felt that the years invested in Margaret and then in CJ had led nowhere, that the whole love triangle arc was wasted energy that resolved in a character who had no prior relationship to any of it. CJ doesn't even appear in the finale. Word of God confirmed afterward that she cut ties completely, became a professional dodgeball player, and doesn't talk to any of the main characters. For viewers who had been invested in one side of the triangle or the other, that had the feeling of being discarded. The counter-argument which I find more convincing is that the show was being honest in a way that is genuinely harder to do than the satisfying narrative resolution would have been. Mordecai failed Margaret and CJ. Not villainously, not through malice, but consistently and at real cost to both of them. He failed to be honest with Margaret for 4 seasons. He failed to be fully present with CJ and said his unresolved feelings were resolved when they weren't. He stood up at his friend's wedding and made it about himself. The writers themselves said he was too wishy-washy with both of them. Having him end up with either woman in the finale would require the show to imply that the way he handled those relationships was ultimately okay, that romantic persistence and genuine feeling eventually overcame the damage his avoidance did. It wasn't okay. The show refuses to pretend otherwise. What he gets instead is the earned version, not the perfect past restored, but the good future built by being different. That's the more honest story. I want to come back to the show's parents' decision, because it is underappreciated in how much it sharpens the arc. Mordecai's parents appear on screen, and they are perfectly normal, warm, loving, supportive, embarrassing. In the specific way, good parents are embarrassing, too enthusiastic, too proud, asking the slightly wrong questions but asking them with genuine affection. His mom is gentle and kind. They show up to cheer. There are no monsters in his past, no defining wound, no difficult childhood that explains and contextualizes the pattern of avoidance. This is a deliberate, creative choice, and it is a challenging one. We are trained by stories to look for the origin, the bad parent, the early trauma, the formative failure that explains why someone is the way they are. The show denies Mordecai this. His family was loving. Whatever he is working through, it isn't that, which means the work falls entirely on him. He cannot locate his avoidance in the past and find a way to process that past and be freed from the pattern through the processing. The pattern is just his. The choice to change it is just his. There is no unlocking event coming, no conversation that will release him, no revelation that will make it all make sense. There is only the daily choice, made again and again, to be a little braver than yesterday. This is harder than a wound you can trace, and the show knows it. It is easier to understand someone's avoidance when you can point to the thing that taught them to be avoidant. When there's nothing to point to, when the choice to stay small is just a choice being made, the responsibility is absolute. The show's refusal to give Mordecai an origin story is its way of saying, without saying it, you cannot wait for an explanation to arrive and free you. You have to just go. Everything the show builds arrives at the finale's time skip, which happens quietly and quickly, and then expands outward into everything the arc has been working toward. Mordecai quits the park. He goes and becomes an artist. He shows up at galleries. He puts his work in front of people. He eventually looks up from signing autographs and sees Steph. And the world goes slightly quiet the way it does when something is about to be important, and they meet. They get married. They have 3 children. At the 25-year reunion, they arrive together, the kids on their devices, Steph talking to Eileen, Mordecai, finding Rigby in the crowd, and the two of them standing together, being older versions of the same people they always were, in all the ways that the years should change you, and in all the ways they shouldn't. The show about wasted time ends with the time not wasted, just taken differently than expected. That is not a consolation prize. That is the actual truth about how a lot of lives go. You don't always get there on the route you planned. You don't always get there on schedule. You get there when you have run out of comfortable reasons not to go, when the weight of who you've been finally gets lighter than the possibility of who you could be. When someone dies, saving the universe so that you can have ordinary days, and you decide to make the ordinary days worth having. Mordecai went, and somewhere out there, at his gallery, with his 3 children who are half blue jay and half bat, and probably have strong opinions about very specific things, with Steph who chose him and got the version of him that finally showed up somewhere out there. The park is still running. Benson is still there. The house still has things in the attic. The afternoon is still soft and unhurried, the way it only gets at a city park where the extraordinary keeps breaking through the ordinary, and 2 young groundskeepers deal with whatever comes before the credits roll. Some of us needed that park. Some of us needed to watch those 2 slackers for years and feel recognized in the drift of their days, in the warmth of their friendship, in the slow and achingly recognizable weight of time going by without the thing you were supposed to do getting done. Regular Show understood that viewer. It built everything for them. And then, quietly, without fanfare or speech, it showed them what it looks like on the other side. It showed them Mordecai at the gallery, standing up, finally there. The show was never really about the cosmic monsters. It was about what keeps you from doing the thing you always knew you were supposed to do. And it turns out the answer, in his case, and maybe in yours, is a combination of the wrong measuring stick, and the wrong context, and the long comfortable habit of deferral. And the solution is to put the measuring stick down, change the context, and just go. Just go. But before I get to those textures, I want to stop and sit with something that the broader conversation about Regular Show doesn't often address. The show's position in the history of what animation was allowed to do in that era, and why the choice to build a character like Mordecai at that time and in that medium was not something to take for granted. Regular Show premiered in 2010 on Cartoon Network, which was in the middle of a particular creative renaissance. Adventure Time had launched earlier that year. The amazing world of Gumball was about to begin. The network had gone through several years of programming instability and creative uncertainty, and was finding its footing again through a generation of animators and writers who had grown up watching the previous generation of Cartoon Network originals and were now making work for audiences that were older than the traditional children's animation demographic audiences who were themselves in their 20s, who had grown up with the network, who were watching late at night in apartments. What this context allowed, what Regular Show was doing, that was genuinely unusual for its moment, was treating young adult emotional experience with the same seriousness it treated any other premise. The show was officially a children's cartoon. The show's actual subject matter, the specific anxieties of people in their early 20s, the weight of time passing without purpose, the complicated machinery of romantic avoidance, The way creative ambition can be eroded by fear until it becomes something unrecognizable is not children's subject matter, or rather, children absorb it on some level, but you need to have been 23 for it to feel the way it wants to be felt. Mordecai works as a character because he is drawn with the precision of a creator who remembered exactly what that specific confusion feels like. And the medium of animation gave the show the distance to say things honestly that might have felt unbearable in live action. When Mordecai drops to his knees in Stake Me Amadeus, the fact that he is an animated blue jay in a cartoon restaurant allows the emotion to be felt without the self-consciousness that a live-action equivalent might trigger. The distance of the cartoon format is what makes the intimacy possible. The animated absurdity is what lets the show say the true thing directly. This is why the regular show approach to Mordecai still resonates differently than most animated characters of comparable complexity. The show was not performing depth as a brand attribute or an awards strategy. It was using depth because the creator was working from autobiographical material, and the honesty of the source came through the character in a way that is genuinely hard to manufacture. Mordecai is specific in all the right ways because he was based on a specific real person's experience. The ache is real because the memory behind it is real. Now, the textures. Before we close, though, I want to go a few layers deeper because everything I've talked about so far is the arc, the story of where Mordecai is and where he ends up. What I haven't fully addressed is the texture, the specific details, the episodes that do the most work, the images and scenes and small moments that, if you've watched the show, probably live in you somewhere without you being able to exactly explain why. That's where I want to spend the rest of our time. One of the quieter strands running through Mordecai's whole arc is the recurring motif of daydreaming. It appears more in his story than in anyone else's, and the show uses it in a particular way that I think is worth unpacking. Mordecai daydreams about being an airline pilot. He daydreams about being with Margaret in a specific kind of domestic future. There's an episode, Just Friends, where a vision of a life with her includes 3 children and a houseboat, and the specificity of the houseboat detail is the kind of thing that makes you feel the weight of how long he has been carrying this. He daydreams about professional success. He daydreams about being good at things he hasn't tried yet. The daydreaming is not harmless. It feels harmless from the outside, who doesn't have daydreams, who doesn't have private visions of a different life. But what the show quietly understands is that the daydream can become a substitute for the actual thing. If you have imagined the gallery opening in enough detail, if you have run the romantic reconciliation scene in your head often enough, if you have felt the imagined success vividly enough, there is a way in which the emotional work of the thing has already been done inside you without any of the actual work of the thing having happened in reality. This is a documented feature of human psychology. Research on mental simulation has shown that people who rehearse desired outcomes in vivid detail can reduce their actual motivation to pursue those outcomes, because the brain, on some level, has registered the experience of the outcome without distinguishing it sharply from the experience of actually doing the work. Mordecai's daydreams are not helping him get to the gallery. In some sense, they are keeping him from it, because they are giving him the feeling of the future he wants without any of the cost. Maillard's package uses the daydream this way explicitly. The episode opens with him deep in a vision of the airline career passengers chanting his name, crew thanking him for his responsibility and dedication, logo designs for his company that he painted himself, and then Benson yells, "Mordecai," and he is back in the morning meeting. The show stages this as comedy, but the comedy lands because of the specific quality of the gap. The dream is not about wealth or fame. It is about being responsible and creative and recognized, which is a normal professional aspiration. The gap between the dream and the gutters is not a gap between impossible fantasy and mundane reality. It is a gap between what he wants and what he is willing to do to get it, which is ultimately not a gap between the dream and the world. It is a gap entirely inside him. There is also something worth saying about the coffee shop as a location, because it functions in Mordecai's story as one of the show's most carefully used symbolic spaces. The coffee shop is the place he goes when the park's ordinary pressures feel like too much, and it is the place where Margaret is, and these two facts are not separable. He goes there to escape the park and to be near her. Both of those motives are real. Neither of them is the thing he actually needs to do at the coffee shop, which is to say what he means. The coffee shop is the show's image of intimacy as setting rather than act. He goes there. He sits across from her, or near her, or at a counter where she can see him. He orders coffee. He talks about things, and the context of the coffee shop provides a warmth and closeness that could be mistaken for the actual relationship he wants if you're not looking carefully. He is near her. They are in a place together that feels like a shared life. But the component that would make it a shared life, the honest conversation, the declaration, the actual choosing, that's the thing that keeps not happening. The show uses the coffee shop architecture to show you Mordecai's avoidance at its most comfortable and its most costly simultaneously. The comfortable version, he gets to be near her, to feel the warmth of her company, to pretend in some way that this is the life. The costly version, he does this instead of having the conversation that would make the life real, and every coffee visit where he doesn't say what he means is both a pleasure and a delay. After Margaret leaves for journalism school, the coffee shop stops being his place. It becomes something else, somewhere Eileen still works, somewhere the crew still goes, but it has lost its specific meaning for Mordecai. There is no one there for him to almost say something to, and that loss is part of what eventually, slowly, forces him to go elsewhere. He has to find a different place to project his imagination onto, and eventually, the place he finds is a canvas. I want to talk about one of the show's most underappreciated Mordecai moments, because it is not in a famous episode, and it doesn't get much attention in the wider conversation about the show, and it does something very specific that matters. In Just Set Up the Chairs, Season 1, Episode 3, Mordecai and Rigby are given the simple task of setting up chairs for a concert. They don't do it. They play a video game instead. They nearly get fired. The episode ends with them scrambling to fix everything at the last moment, managing just barely to pull it off. This is the template episode. This is the DNA of the show in its purest form. Mordecai and Rigby are assigned a task. They choose not to do it. The consequences escalate. They save it by the skin of their teeth. The loop resets. This is the formula. What is interesting about Mordecai specifically in this and in the other template episodes of the early seasons is how conscious he is of the choice. He knows they should do the chairs. He is not unaware of the task. He is actively choosing to defer it, not because he has a good reason, but because the video game is right there and the chairs can wait, and one more round won't hurt. That is the choice. Not the dramatic choice of someone who has weighed their options and decided, the quiet, barely registered choice of someone who has learned to make that particular choice so often that it barely registers as a choice at all. This is the everyday texture of Mordecai's stasis, and the show is very patient in establishing it in the early seasons, because what it is building toward requires this foundation. The big failures, the Margaret thing, the CJ thing, the art school dropout, those are the dramatic versions of the pattern. But the pattern lives first in the small version, in the morning meeting, and the video game, and the chairs that need setting up. It lives in all the unremarkable Tuesdays where nothing important is at stake, and he still makes the same choice. The pattern of deferral was not built in a crisis. It was built in 1,000 ordinary afternoons that nobody remembers because nothing memorable happened. This is one of the truest things about regular show. The show understands that most of a life is not dramatic. Most of a life is the Tuesday afternoons, the chairs that need setting up, the small choices that seem weightless but accumulate into the shape of who you are. Mordecai's problem is not that he failed at the big moments. It's that the small choices trained him in a direction, and by the time the big moments arrived, he had been trained long enough that the pattern was what came naturally. Let me spend some time on Margaret's departure, specifically on Laundry Woes, which is the season 5 episode that follows directly from Stake Me Amadeus, because I think it shows something important about how the show handles grief versus how it handles the useful version of grief. Mordecai is a mess in Laundry Woes. That is not a criticism. He is supposed to be a mess. He has just lost the person he spent 4 years wishing for, and the loss is the specific kind of loss where you can't cleanly grieve because part of the grief is knowing you could have prevented it. And the mixture of those two things is one of the harder things to hold. Rigby finds Margaret's sweater at the house. Mordecai sees it and immediately wants to return it to her, wants an excuse to see her, wants to believe there is still something to be done, wants the loss not to be the final thing it is. And Rigby, in one of his periodic moments of being the wisest person in the room without seeming like it, does everything he can to stop Mordecai from going. Not because he's being cruel, because he knows, in the simple way Rigby sometimes just knows things, that what Mordecai is calling returning the sweater is actually called refusing to let go. The sweater comes to life in the way regular show objects do when the narrative needs them to make a point directly, and it tells Mordecai that Margaret left because of him, that she would come back if he brought the sweater, that the story is not over yet. Mordecai wants to believe it. He almost does. And Rigby, at the end, tells him plainly, she is gone. She is not coming back for a sweater. This is the thing now. You have to let it be the thing. What Laundry Woes is doing is showing you the crucial difference between grief that moves and grief that sticks. Grief that moves is what Rigby is trying to help Mordecai find, the kind where you feel the loss, acknowledge it, and eventually, gradually, let it become part of your history rather than the wall you're still running at. Grief that sticks is the sweater drive, the invented reason to go back, the refusal to let the ending be the ending. Mordecai's tendency toward the sticky version of grief is consistent with everything else about him. He holds on to the version of things he wanted instead of the version of things as they are, and the holding on is always more comfortable in the short term and more expensive in the long term. He does eventually let the sweater go. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just quietly, in the way the show handles its emotional beats when they're working right. The sweater ends up handled. He goes home. The next episode starts. He is still sad, and the show does not pretend otherwise. But he is moving. That capacity for eventual movement, the fact that he does, slowly and imperfectly, process things and come out the other side, is part of what distinguishes Mordecai from a character who is simply hopeless. He is not hopeless. He is stuck in specific ways that have specific causes and require specific conditions to become unstuck. But the capacity for movement is there. The show would not spend 8 seasons on him if it weren't. There's a recurring visual that I want to name because I think it is one of the show's most deliberate and most understated pieces of Mordecai characterization. Mordecai, standing somewhere elevated, looking out, the roof of the house. The roof of Maillard's mansion. Ledges, overlooks, heights. The show regularly puts him in high places for his most honest moments. The conversations with Rigby, where the question nearly gets asked. The silences after the big losses. The quiet pauses that precede or follow moments of genuine reckoning. It is not a coincidence. High places in film and television are conventionally used for this. The person above the normal level of life, momentarily removed from its immediate flow, able to see further but also unable to act from that distance. Mordecai's recurring positions in high places are the show's visual grammar for his emotional state. He is someone who can see his situation clearly from a certain remove, who can articulate what's wrong, who can feel the weight of the passing time, who can formulate the question but who keeps the insight at the elevated distance rather than bringing it down to ground level where it would require action. The roof is not the place where things happen. Things happen in the park below, in the coffee shop down the road, at the gallery where Steph is signing autographs. The roof is where you go to feel the question. What the finale's time skip suggests, without stating it, is that Mordecai eventually came down from the roof. He eventually brought the insight to ground level, where it could become something more than a feeling. The gallery is a ground level place. The art studio is a ground level place. The life with Steph and their 3 children that is emphatically a ground level life, full of the daily ordinary contact of actual living. He came down from the roof. The rooftop of Maillard's mansion, in this reading, is where he asked the question. The gallery is where he answered it. There is one more thing worth saying about Mordecai's arc that tends to get lost in the larger romantic and creative story, and it involves the way the show handles the particular flavor of male friendship that Mordecai and Rigby embody. Their friendship is physically affectionate in the way that close male friendships sometimes are and are not often depicted honestly on screen. They fall asleep next to each other. They share a couch, a room, a life in the full daily sense. They know each other in the way you only know someone when you have been watching them exist across all their ordinary moments for years. They express care for each other in ways that the show does not ironize or masculinity test or feel the need to defend. And this is part of what makes Mordecai's stasis so legible. He has the full warmth of this friendship. He has a daily life that is, in all the ways that matter for day-to-day comfort, genuinely good. He is not lonely in any obvious sense. He is loved consistently by his best friend in a way that does not require him to earn it or perform for it. The friendship is simply there. This is the thing that makes the question harder. When you have warmth and companionship and enough comfort to be reasonably content on any given day, the pressure to risk the thing that would make the life more complete is lower. The drift is not just possible because Mordecai is avoidant. It is possible because the park provides enough that avoidance doesn't leave you obviously destitute. You can be warm and loved and comfortable and still be, in a very specific sense, not living the life you were supposed to live. Those two things coexist. Regular Show understands this. It understands that a lot of people who get stuck in their 20s are not obviously miserable, are not desperate or isolated or clearly failing in visible ways. They are basically fine. They have friends. They have laughs. They have the afternoon couch and the video game and the cup of coffee and the easy companionship. And inside the basically fine is the quiet, persistent hum of the unlived life, the art not made, the thing not said, the choice not taken. The show takes that hum seriously. It doesn't pathologize it or dramatize it more than it is. It just depicts it accurately and over time until it becomes impossible for the character or the audience to look away from what it's been quietly showing them. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that holds the whole argument together for me, is the parallel between Mordecai and the show itself. Regular Show was given a defined ending by Cartoon Network. The show ran for 8 seasons and then it ended, on the network's schedule rather than purely on the creative teams. The space arc, the cosmic escalation, the final battle, all of this was shaped in part by the knowledge that the clock was running, that the story needed to find its resolution within the remaining time. J.G. Quintel and the writing team knew they were writing toward a finish line. And what they chose to do with that knowledge is interesting. They did not rush. They did not try to cram everything in frantically. They kept the show's pace, the unhurried quality of those afternoons, the space for small moments to breathe, the willingness to let a rooftop conversation be just what it is, rather than forcing it to carry more than it can hold. But they also, across the final seasons, gave every character the specific ending their arc was always building toward. Rigby's arc ends with graduation and a family and the quiet, hard-won dignity of someone who did the unfinished work of their younger self. Muscle Man's arc ends with children who are extensions of his specific brand of love and loyalty. Benson's arc ends with cats and a wife and the park he devoted his life to, finally running the way he always wanted it to. Pops's arc ends with the most profound sacrifice the show could imagine, and the show stages it with the care and the grief it deserves. And Mordecai's arc ends with a gallery and a Batwoman and 3 children, and the specific version of the life he always had within himself, but needed to find his way to. The show spent 7 years building toward that ending, not rushing to it, not telegraphing it, just slowly, season by season, removing the conditions that were keeping Mordecai in the drift until the only thing left was the choice. And the choice was, show up. Just show up to the thing. That's it. That's the whole lesson, rendered over 8 seasons and 200 plus episodes and more cosmic catastrophe than should be possible in a single public park. Show up. Do the work. Stop waiting for the conditions to be perfect, because they're never going to be perfect. Because perfection is not a condition of the world, it is a condition you keep inventing to justify not starting. The show knew who it was talking to. It was talking to 20-somethings sitting in the dark who recognized themselves in the guy who kept putting things off, who kept letting the perfect moment pass, who asked, "Is this it?" on a rooftop, and then went back to the meeting. It was saying, patiently, across all those episodes, you are not stuck forever. The gallery is there. The person you are supposed to meet is there. The version of yourself that shows up to things is already inside you. You just have to come down from the roof. I want to end with one more thing, because I think it might be the most honest way to close this particular conversation. Regular Show is a show about wasted time, yes, but wasted is not the same as lost. There is a crucial distinction between those two words that the show earns the right to make by the time it's finished. Wasted time is time spent in the wrong way, time not used toward what matters, time that passes without the decisions that needed to be made. Mordecai wastes time. That is undeniable. 4 seasons of not asking Margaret out is wasted time. The years after art school spent at a groundskeeper job when he should have been painting are, in the narrow sense, wasted. The relationship failures, the rooftop questions that dissolved back into afternoons, All of it is the texture of a life spent in the soft, comfortable, expensive drift of not choosing. But lost time is time that's gone without having given you anything. And that is not what the park years are for Mordecai. He came out of those years knowing exactly who Rigby is, in the full complicated way that you only know someone when you've lived alongside them for the whole of your early adulthood. He came out of them having faced genuine cosmic stakes, having been tested in ways that had nothing to do with his personal fears and found to be capable. He came out of them having loved Margaret and CJ in ways that were real, even if they were handled badly, having learned through those losses what it cost to defer the important conversation, having accumulated enough concrete evidence of what the drift costs that he couldn't pretend not to know anymore. He came out of them as himself, not a different, better self. Not someone who wouldn't recognize the person who sat on those couches playing video games, but himself, with the specific kind of self-knowledge that only comes from having been the person who made those choices long enough to understand them from the inside. The show's argument, in the end, is not that the time at the park was well spent. It is that it was necessary. Not all wasted time is lost time. Sometimes the drift is the season you had to be in before you could be in the next one. Sometimes the rooftop question is the thing that had to be asked, even in its half-formed way, before you could go downstairs and start moving toward the answer. This is a generous thing to believe about your own past and about other people's. It requires you to look at the years you spent standing still and say, I was not just wasting myself. I was also, in some way, I couldn't see at the time, preparing myself. Not efficiently, not by any kind of design. But the preparation happened anyway, in the drift and the losses and the small daily choices and the rooftop conversations and the moments of almost. Mordecai at the gallery is the accumulated weight of all of it. Not despite the years at the park, but through them. Not in spite of the avoidance, but informed by having lived it long enough to finally understand it from the inside. The show gives him that, not as a gift he didn't earn, as a consequence of having eventually, imperfectly, taken the step. And if that sounds like it applies to more than just a blue jay in an animated comedy about a city park, if it sounds like something that might apply to the person watching this tonight, in the dark, with headphones in, having spent some time in their own particular version of the drift, then I think the show would be glad. That's what it was always for. And while we are here, right at the very end of it, I want to say something about what it means to watch Regular Show in 2026, because the show ended in 2017, and the people who watched it in real time are now in their 30s. And there is a particular experience of going back to it with that much distance that is worth naming. When you watch Mordecai at 23, from the perspective of being 32 or 35, something shifts. The show, which was sympathetic when you were inside the same fog he was in, becomes something a little different now. Not less sympathetic, but differently sympathetic. You are not watching the show from the same level as Mordecai anymore. You are watching it from a bit further along, from somewhere closer to the gallery at the end, and the version of him on the park roof asking whether this is the best he can do is no longer exactly you. It's someone you remember. That is a specific and irreplaceable kind of watching. There is nothing like the experience of returning to a piece of art that caught you at a particular moment and finding that you have moved since then, that the thing that was a mirror when you first saw it has become something more, like a portrait of a younger self. The mirror is still there. You can still find yourself in it, but the version of yourself you find is younger and softer and more stuck. And the person doing the watching knows how it turns out, and that knowledge changes everything. This is part of why regular show endures the way it endures, why the wiki keeps growing, why people who watched it at 23 go back to it at 32 and find something new. The show was built for multiple distances. It works when you're inside the fog, and it works when you've come out the other side, and it works differently in each position, and both versions are genuine. If you are watching this, and you are still inside the fog, still in the drift, still on the rooftop with the question you haven't answered yet, the show is for you. In the first way, it sees you. It is patient with you. It is not telling you to hurry up or get your act together. It is just keeping you company in the honest acknowledgement that this is where you are, and it is a real place to be, and it will not be where you are forever. If you are watching this from further along, if you have your version of the gallery and your version of Steph, if the particular fog of your 20s has lifted enough that you can see its shape from outside it, the show is for you in the second way. It is the version of your younger self rendered with enough affection and enough honesty that you can love them and also see them clearly simultaneously. It is the thing that helps you be generous about your own past, generous in the specific way that says, I understand why I was like that, and I know how it came out. Both of those are good ways to watch. Both of those are why it still matters, years after the last episode aired. And one more thing, because it deserves to be said plainly rather than embedded in a larger point. The show was kind, not in a way that softened the truth, not in a way that let characters off hooks they'd earned getting caught on, but in the underlying attitude toward its characters and its audience. It was made by people who genuinely liked Mordecai, who saw the real humanity in his failures, who were not interested in punishing him for being stuck, even as they were honest about the cost of the stuckness. That combination, honesty and affection together at the same time, is harder to achieve than either one alone. A lot of stories are honest without being kind. A lot of stories are kind without being honest. Regular Show managed both, consistently, across 8 seasons and 200 episodes, and the full career arc of a Blue Jay groundskeeper who eventually became an artist. That's worth something. That's worth coming back to. That's worth an evening in the dark with headphones in, following it down to the bottom of it one more time. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your time on this. A character like Mordecai, fictional, drawn, voiced in a creator's own voice as a version of himself, doesn't usually get the kind of sustained attention that real people get. But the show built something real in him. Something that carries genuine weight even across the distance of animation, and a finished run and years since the credits last rolled. He deserved the close reading. He deserved someone going back through all of it and naming what the show was doing. I hope this was that, and I hope it gave you something to carry back into your own afternoon, your own evening, your own version of the life you are still figuring out how to build. The park was never really about a park. It was about the time before the time, and the time before the time was never wasted. It was only ever waiting for you to be ready. That is where I'll leave it tonight. If you've been here for this lying somewhere in the dark or the soft afternoon light, having spent this time back in the park thinking about a blue jay who took a long time to get where he was always going, I'm genuinely grateful for it. This is what this channel is for. Going into the shows that deserved more than a recap, sitting with the characters that were doing more work than their premises suggested, finding the thing underneath the thing, and going down into it until something true surfaces. If this one found you in the right moment, a like on the video genuinely helps more than it might seem. It's how the algorithm figures out who else to show it to the next person lying in the dark who needed to hear exactly this tonight The next 23-year-old on their own version of the park roof, the next person who has been waiting for the right conditions and needs someone to tell them, gently but plainly, that the conditions are never coming and the only move is to go. And if you want to be here for whatever we go into next, subscribing keeps that door open. There is always more to explore, always more shows that deserve this kind of time, always more characters who are doing more work than the premise suggested. There always is. The park is still there if you need it. The door is unlocked. The Yeti is on the porch. The afternoon is soft and the cart is parked. And somewhere in the house, in the attic, something is waiting to be found. Sleep well. The park exists in a particular way in the imagination of everyone who spent real time with it, not as a place you visited, but as a place you knew. The way you know somewhere you have been going back to for years. It stays available. You can walk back into it whenever the night calls for it. The staff will be there. The afternoon will be soft. And somewhere in the accumulated weight of all those episodes, all those Tuesday mornings and cosmic disasters and rooftop questions, there is still Mordecai still figuring it out, still almost saying the thing, still the version of you that you were before you found your way to the gallery.